Who were the basketball stars that came before Caitlin Clark in Iowa, and how did they pave the way? The Next's founder and editor, Howard Megdal, literally wrote the book on it and is here to chat all about becoming Caitlin Clark, the unknown origin story of a modern basketball superstar. Locked On Women's Basketball starts now.
You are Locked On Women's Basketball, your daily podcast on women's basketball. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and happy Friday. Thanks for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen every day. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm Natalie Heavren, and I'm a features writer and the Atlantic 10 beat reporter for The Next. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. Today, we'll chat all about Howard's latest book, Becoming Caitlin Clark, the unknown origin story of a modern basketball superstar, including why he wrote it, how 6-on-6 has influenced the modern era of basketball in Iowa, and go behind the scenes of recording an audiobook and writing a book. Joining me today is founder and editor of The Next and The Nine and author of now 8 books, Howard Megdal. So your book, Becoming Caitlin Clark, and I will keep holding it up for the people on YouTube, the unknown origin story of a modern basketball superstar officially comes out on Tuesday, the 17th, so just 4 days away. I pre-ordered it through your publisher, and it came early, so I've already read it, and listeners, go order it now, either in print, or Howard also recorded an audiobook, which we'll talk about later in segment 3. But Howard, why did you decide to write this book on Caitlin Clark and Iowa women's basketball? Because it's about so much more than just Clark, and then also why now and why in this moment?
Well, so first of all, Natalie, thank you for having me on the show. Let the record show, Natalie asked me to be on, which I appreciated very much. But it is a delight to work with you for many, many years, as I will never stop telling you. But the simplest answer to this question is that as we're watching this rise of Caitlin Clark, and not just watching, obviously, we report about it all the time at The Next, there is several other strands that go along with it. And you know this well because of the work you've done about the WBL, that there is this effectively a century of history that helped produce this current moment. And in my mind, there are two things here, right? What Caitlin is doing is unprecedented. And what Caitlin is doing is utterly impossible, if not for some key decisions and work and effort along the way from those who came before her. And this won't be us today, but the dumbest discourse online seems to argue it must be either one or the other. And instead, and what's so beautiful about this to me and why I loved researching and writing this book so much is both of these things are intertwined in ways that are not just significant for now, but will be vital to what happens in the future.
Yeah, and going off of that, in the book, you perfectly showcase how the history and more than a century of history of Iowa girls and women's basketball has influenced the present. Why was that an important point for you to make in all 200 plus pages of this book?
Well, it isn't just that the history influences it, right? It's the fact that without this history, this doesn't happen. Let me give you an example. In 1925, Iowa moved to ban girls varsity high school basketball. As crazy as it sounds in retrospect, all over the country, states did this. My previous book, Rare Gems, and it's nice, I have that over my shoulder and Caitlin over I just parallel it to my head. But, in Minnesota, 40 plus years went by without girls varsity high school basketball. And then Pepsi Newman came along and changed that. In Iowa, a handful of administrators stood up to this because girls basketball was already such a significant part of the culture in Iowa. And as a result, we had no gap in Iowa, no period of time where we didn't see girls playing high school basketball. It mattered for several reasons. Number one was that the state championship tournament became this crown jewel event, which meant that not only was basketball widely played and widely appreciated, but public figures were made of the top stars for this period of decades that followed. And when you look at why is Caitlin Clark at 22, 23 years old able to weather being the eye of this hurricane, it's because she was raised in a place where girls and women were elevated publicly when they play basketball. So that's part one of it. Part two, and equally significant, is the fact that there was on-court innovation that came along with it. So because there was no gap, one of the teams I spotlight is the 1962 Van Horn Hornets. And the way in which they played, it just mirrors what Caitlin is doing today in 1962. These guards buzzing around. They were not the biggest team, but with pinpoint passing and setting of screens and long range shots, they were able to innovate to create a brand new way of playing basketball. And by the way, all 6 members of those 6-on-6 starting team are still with us. Larry Wiebke, the head coach, is still with us. The 6 of them have a group chat. And what do? They watch Caitlin Clark play basketball, and they talk about the ways in which she's reflecting what they were as players to this date. So again, if that innovation doesn't happen, 1962 is a period of time where most states in the union didn't even have girls varsity basketball. Do we get to a point where a Caitlin Clark is able to build her own game in the model of, again, not just what was being done, but also simultaneously was being taught to people like Lisa Bluter and Jan Jensen, who were her vital coaches' voices in college. None of this can be separated from any other part of it.
Yeah, definitely. And we'll talk more about how the history has impacted the present. And I just want to make it known to all of our listeners that you can watch these old state championship games on YouTube. So I think you can watch the 1962 one. That seems familiar. I feel like I've watched it, but you see the crowds, you see all the reporters there, you see all the cameras going off in the background.
That was the first televised sporting event in Iowa of any kind. It was the girls' high school basketball championships.
And, I know I just said we'll get back to that, but, how does that building, continue and culminate in what we saw at the end of Clark's college career with all these sold out arenas and immense, ticket prices and just everyone wanting and putting in that effort to try to see her?
It was almost like a nationalizing of what Iowa has always done well. And so, the 2 parts to that, from my mind, are it's amazing. I've had other people ask, what's the thing you learned the most about Caitlin? What was fascinating to me was there was no public breaking down either on the court or off the court as the attention continued to rise. And again, because I think it was just so normalized in this way, but it also has allowed a model essentially to take hold. And again, that model manifests itself in a lot of different ways. It manifested itself in girls' high school basketball. It manifested itself in when C. Vivian Stringer came to coach at the University of Iowa. Her vision was to fill Carver Hawkeye Arena. And she actually went public with this. And it happened in March of 1985, 40 years ago now. And I had the privilege of spending the afternoon with Vivian talking about her memories from that time. What was Vivian's motivation for thinking this was even possible? She went to the high school girls championship in Iowa, saw what those crowds were like, and said, we're going to replicate that at the college level. Again, a precursor for what we saw from Caitlin.
And, you start the book with the end of the 2024 Indiana Fever season before eventually going back to various points in her college career and the first season of her WNBA career. Why was that an important place for you to touch on first before going into so many different angles of her still very young career?
Because they're all mirror images of each other, right? And the language even, I spent a good bit of time at the Iowa Women's Archive at the University of Iowa, which is just an amazing place to go. And the stuff I had to leave on the cutting room floor could make a whole other book. But, when you would hear these echoes, because I'm also, as I'm writing this book, covering the WNBA in real time, and Caitlin says something, and somebody from 1914 on an early Iowa girls high school basketball team says something, and they sound the same. This rhythm of it was something that I wanted to do. So the way I structured the book was we start at this side of it and we start at this side of it, and the rainbow kind of builds into the middle where Jan Jensen and Lisa Bluter first see Caitlin Clark play as a 7th grader. I think that's important because people need to understand the past isn't even past.
Yes, definitely. And once again, showing the cover, which I will continue to do throughout the episode. Make sure people can find it on their local bookstore shelves. But, that was something that I really enjoyed, was just seeing all those parallels continue to build. But coming up next, we'll talk about how 6-on-6s influenced the modern era of basketball in Iowa. Today's episode is brought to you by Olipop. Olipop is a new kind of soda made for people who love the classic taste of soda but want something that supports their health. With just 2 to 5 grams of sugar and 9 grams of prebiotic fiber in every can, Olipop is reimagining soda in a way that's better for your gut. I recently found out that I'm insulin resistant, and I love Olipop because it's soda that tastes like the real thing, but actually does something good for your body. It has just a fraction of the sugar, no artificial sweeteners, and gut-friendly ingredients like OliSmart, a blend shown to support digestive and overall health. I also love that Olipop gives me about 1/3 of my daily recommended fiber. While I'm partial to the classic grape flavor, I truly love them all. Get a free can of Olipop. Just buy any 2 cans in store and they'll reimburse you for one. Head to drinkolipop.com/LockedOnNBA to claim your free can and find Olipop near you. That's drinkolipop.com/LockedOnNBA. So, Howard, we weren't going to be able to get through this episode without talking about 6-on-6 because it wasn't unique to Iowa, but because there wasn't really basketball was never removed from girls growing up in Iowa. And it lasted so long in Iowa into the 90s. So what made Iowa so unique over the course of decades, where across the country, a lot of girls and women didn't have opportunities to play basketball?
A handful of people who understood the value of girls basketball. When you read about the comments from somebody like McIntyre, who was an early and significant figure in girls basketball in Iowa, they don't just speak about it in generalities. The famous quote is that if you try to ban women's basketball, and I'm paraphrasing it, but it'll be the train that runs you over. I mean, it was that level of understanding and appreciation. And again, it goes back to what's mind-blowing to me. McIntyre's first championship team, the best player on it was Dorcas Anderson, Jan Jensen's grandma. So again, these links to where Caitlin Clark is now, it's not 6 degrees of separation. There's these sort of direct impacts. And, it's fair to wonder, if not for a Dorcas Anderson, does McIntyre by 1925 know that, understand that, and put himself on the line to continue it going? But so the easiest way to think about it is it's like a laboratory that got to continue to experiment, to understand, to grow and develop in ways that, at some points were hard to reconcile with the broader landscape. You talk about how 6-on-6 lasted. It lasted into the early 1990s, even once we passed the Title IX era, and suddenly there were college scholarships available. They were for 5-on-5 games. The game was being played differently everywhere else. Early on, University of Iowa used to get routed by tiny schools because, and I spoke to Lark Birdsong, the first head coach there for the women's basketball team, 2 things, right? Number one, they had Christine Grant, who was the women's athletic director over there. She believed in true equality. What does true equality mean? All the women's sports given the same amount of money. So Lark Birdsong didn't have a lot of scholarships at her disposal, no more than track and field would have had, no more than lacrosse or field hockey would have had, right? And so it differed from the men's model where, okay, well, basketball and football are these revenue producing sports, and that's how you do it. But the bigger part and the more basic part of it was Lark got players who she either needed to teach offense or she needed to teach defense when they got to college. And that's not the easiest thing to do for a coach. So, yes, these opportunities to grow, develop the game obviously did far more good than it did held people back. But yeah, there were still adjustments that had to be made along the way once the rest of the country started to catch up.
Yeah, definitely. And one of those 6-on-6 players that we've had on the podcast and we've both talked to at great length that I really loved reading her chapter in the book, Molly Bolin-Kazmer. She was one of those 6-on-6 players. And, you know, a lot of them made it was, for some of them, it was easier than others to transfer those skills to 5-on-5. But I believe Grandview College was one of those small schools where Molly played that beat the University of Iowa.
And handily.
Yes, quite handily. But, you know, we know how crucial it was, and readers and soon listeners will find out, you know, how important it was. But how does it continue to influence the game today?
It's really hard to see the modern WNBA offenses and not see the 6-on-6 influence that goes with it. You know, pace being such a significant part of it. The irony of the 6-on-6 as it was originally conceived, of course, was, well, this will take it easy for girls and women, right? And, you know, that way they don't have to go all the way up and down the court, because heaven forbid you ask women to do that, right? But the net result ended up being that you had these fast half-court 3-on-3 matchups going at any one time with no necessarily like stopping points in between them. And so it ends up being a much harder game to navigate, entertaining as could be, but it parallels the way we're seeing the most fast-paced offenses of today. They also directly impacted the way Lisa Bluder designed her offense and implemented it with Jan Jensen at Iowa. And so, again, to the extent that Caitlin Clark is a product of the 6-on-6 game, the Indiana Fever are built around Caitlin Clark's game. To the extent that Caitlin Clark is a product of the 6-on-6 game, Iowa and many people like Iowa are building around these pinpoint passes, the shots beyond the arc and at the rim. Those are the coaches who are getting hired in the W now. That's what Lynn Roberts was doing at Utah. That's what, you know, you were seeing Carl Smeshko do at FGCU before he became the head coach of the Atlanta Dream. These ideas are simultaneously at the forefront of the women's game, and also something that are a product of the 100 years of history all at the same time. It's just this beautiful combination.
And maybe for some of our listeners that can't necessarily visualize 6-on-6, haven't gone to YouTube yet and watched it, you know, who are some modern era players that you think would have excelled at 6-on-6, former Iowa players or not?
I mean, notably, again, Indiana's got several of them, right? Kelsey Mitchell was built to be a 3-on-3 player. In fact, Molly Bolin-Kazmer in our interviews talked about that she, as a player, the comp she would give is not Caitlin. It was Kelsey Mitchell. She would have liked to have been the 2 guard next to a Caitlin Clark, is the way in which she put it. But again, vital to those games, right? Having an elite big who can score at the rim and can be dedicated to that the way, by the way, Jan Jensen was in college or in high school and college. In high school, where she scored 111 in a single game, 105, in a single game, and averaged north of 60 points per game. And then in college, she ended up going to Drake and she averaged 29 and a half her senior year. But boy, Aaliyah Boston would have been perfect for that. Look, Sylvia Fowles would have been perfect for that. You just would have wasted her defense on that side of the ball because she would have just been, you'd have to use her as the offensive. I don't know, maybe use her as the defensive player. Sylvia Fowles, best five in the history of the game. So it's hard to say. Oh, now you took me on a very different tangent. I got to think about that one further, but quite a few of today's stars would have done extremely well. Oh, yeah, Lexi Hall would have been incredible. Lexi Hall, just you have her shooting threes as one of the forward players, one of the offensive players. She would have been incredible too.
That's a great point on the defensive end. I know we talk a lot about those that played offense in 6-on-6, but there were the other three on the other side that had to stop the other three from scoring.
Kia Stokes would have been a perfect defensive center in the 6-on-6 game. And you know where Kia Stokes is from? Iowa. So.
Well, coming up next, we'll talk about what goes into recording an audiobook, writing a book, and more. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. The WNBA season is in full swing and every night is exciting. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live. With player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays, fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. Tonight, the Chicago Sky will take on the Atlanta Dream, and the Dallas Wings will face off against the Las Vegas Aces, and I've got my eyes on the money lines for both matchups. The New York Liberty are the only undefeated team in the league right now after the Minnesota Lynx lost on Wednesday night, and you can bet on if the Liberty will go undefeated this season and bet on when you think the team's first loss will come. New to FanDuel, it's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. So, Howard, I have to ask, were you intending to record the audiobook? And then, once you got in the studio, what was recording an audiobook like and all of that?
It was so cool, that when they reached out to say, we'd be interested in having you record the audiobook, I was really excited about it. Ended up being this studio in Philadelphia. I'm in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, so about 15 minutes away from it. And, they were such professionals and so terrific about it and gave me some tips going in. I tried to read up on it ahead of time, and it was so much fun. So I would go in, there were 3 sessions where we were Monday, Friday, Monday, 9 to 3. And I drank an extra amount of tea that week and, did everything I knew of how to preserve my voice as much as possible. And then there's like a handful of, hey, we're going to take this again. And so I came back and I was told that can be up to 2 hours, and it was only 15 minutes. So I was, oh, that's good. I guess I did okay first time out of the box. But it was being able to emphasize things that mattered more to me in the text and being able to make sure people didn't lose the sarcasm along the way, all these sort of different ways where I could bring it to life was really meaningful in a way that I didn't necessarily expect it to be. And so I loved every minute of it.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited to get to listen to the audiobook version and get all those things that you hope us listeners get from it. And then, along the way of you writing the book, I loved you sharing your little historical tidbits along the way, especially from the archives in Iowa. But what was your favorite part of researching and writing this book?
Oh, that's so hard. I loved every bit of it. I mean, listen, that time in the Iowa Women's Archive and being around those people who their daily charge is to make sure we know and remember and understand the impact of women in the state of Iowa was beyond inspiring. It was incredible. Spending the day with Vivian Stringer and just having her talk to me about her history in this game, that was incredible. You know, the hours I got to spend with Lisa Bluter and with Jan Jensen were remarkable. And then just, again, seeing it live, as not only seeing what was happening with Caitlin Clark, because I have a literal front row seat as a member of the media, but knowing I'm going to be able to contextualize it and capture this in a way that goes beyond just a deadline piece I'm writing for one place or another, meant everything to me. But there was no part of this other than knowing I had to cut certain things because it has to be a coherent, compelling narrative, rather than, here is sort of a full download of everything I'm seeing. That was significant. And then again, so to your point, I was in the Iowa Women's Archive and I took pictures of things that I shared in our Slack, just because I wanted you guys to all kind of be there with me. But that's kind of the point of the next in Locked On Women's Basketball too.
Yes, you definitely took us along the way, and now you're sharing what you found with everyone listening.
Yeah.
What do you hope that the lasting impression of this book is, or what do you hope your readers and listeners take away when they close the cover?
That this was not just one person, but what this one person has done is worthy of our time in ways that go beyond just a popularity of the moment. I'm hoping this is a monument to what has led to Caitlin Clark and what Caitlin Clark has done, because I believe that too is paving the way for a fundamentally different landscape for women's basketball going forward. I think that very clearly the new media rights deal was going to change the economics of the WNBA. The fact that it was going to go up by a factor of between 8 and 9 times is in large part a reflection of an audience that Caitlin has brought from college to the pros. And so I think both of those things really matter. But I guess if you're really asking, on top of everything else, I want people to, in the women's sports space, stop confusing process with outcome and realize that by changing the processes that are used going forward, the ceiling on those outcomes is so much higher than anyone ever believed in a lot of the decision-making spaces as it relates to women's basketball. I think that is the thing that needs to change. And I think it will, because I think this is too big to ignore.
And, I think we've talked about every era from Dorcas Anderson through Caitlin Clark. But was there anything else you wanted to touch on kind of those in-between eras that you tied all together?
I know you're going to be mad at me for bringing up Molly again, but I think it's it's going to be really important for people to understand that Molly Bolin Kazmer could have been Caitlin Clark 50 years ago if the landscape were different and the opportunities were different. And I'll remember that to this day and forever, Lisa Bluter lighting up when I told her that Molly was at the 2023 Final Four, because Lisa Bluter had seen her play. And so Lisa had that type of relationship with watching Molly play the way so many people are now getting to have that opportunity watching Caitlin play. The difference is Lisa got to see her because Lisa lived in Iowa and was able to seek her out. Now Caitlin is mainstream because it is easy to see Caitlin Clark play basketball. And so from that perspective, people need to go back and watch highlights of Molly. People need to hear Molly's story. And people also need to understand that Molly was a pioneer, not just in the way she played the game, but to her immense credit, she spent hours talking to me about this. Her papers are at University of Iowa. So I was able to go dig into those and then come back to Molly and say, tell me about this, and just one brief thing. I know we're nearing the end of our time. Molly had this idea of the very best women's players playing these 3-on-3 games. I mean, you can read it, and I have it in the book, and it's unrivaled, but it's unrivaled 30 years ago. And Molly was that far ahead of the curve on it. And ultimately, Unrivaled Success is a direct descendant of the way in which Molly understood the women's game could and would be consumed in 1995. So just a remarkable person who, for Molly alone, you should get to know as you read this book.
Yes, and even I learned more things, and I've talked to her for hours, over the years and in person. Always love learning more about her. For our listeners, make sure you go check out her previous episodes on Locked On Women's Basketball. She's in several stories we've written over at The Next, and I'm sure we'll be in more to come. But thank you, Howard, so much for joining me today. One question I always ask at the end, where can people find you and your work and all of your books?
Easiest way, I think, is to follow me on Bluesky, which is where I post most of what I'm doing. You can also find my writer page on Facebook. I will tell you, Becoming Caitlin Clark has a number of events already booked. You can find the Facebook page for Becoming Caitlin Clark, where all of these posts will continue to be updated. On June 18th, the first day after publication, I'm going to be at the Cherry Hill Public Library in Cherry Hill, New Jersey, my hometown library, at 7 o'clock. And then at 9:30 at night, we will have a Zoom event with the King County Public Library out in Seattle at 9:30. There are tickets there. There's a lot of places to follow. So go ahead, follow me there. I'll continue to update everybody about all the places I'm going to be. I can't wait to meet you in person and talk to you about this.
Awesome. Well, I'll have to go sign up for that Seattle event. And I just love that you are going to your hometown library and getting to celebrate this book. I love my hometown library and have recommended that they get your book. So I just love libraries and love that, one of my favorite people is getting to experience a book release and celebrating at his local library. Well, thank you again for joining me today, Howard. And thanks to our listeners for making Locked On Women's Basketball your first listen today. For your second listen, check out the Locked On NBA Big Board Show. NBA draft expert Rafael Barlow reacts to every workout, interview, and rumor leading up to the NBA draft. Find Locked On NBA Big Board on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts.